Good day, everyone, and we're coming on the air at this hour because we are about to hear from Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer and potentially from President Biden, who will be right there with him on what will become a defining moment in President Biden's time in office. Justice Breyer will officially announce his plan to retire from the court. In fact, we've just received a copy of the letter that Justice Breyer turned into the White House, gave to the president, dated today officially. He says, "Dear Mr. President," and he goes on to say a little further into the letter, "I enormously appreciate the privilege of serving as part of the federal judicial system. I have found the work challenging and meaningful." And he goes on to write here at the very end, "I have been aware of the great honor of participating as a judge in the effort to maintain our Constitution and the rule of law." At 83, he is the oldest member of the court, the senior member of the liberal wing, and a staunch defender of a nonpartisan court. Nominated by President Clinton in 1994, he has served as a justice for 27 years, and though he has long talked about the nonpartisan role, what should be the apolitical nature of the court, of course, the timing of his retirement enormously consequential here. With the midterm elections coming, Democrats with the slimmest of majorities in the Senate, Justice Breyer's decision will allow President Biden to make his pick for the court and to fulfill a campaign promise to nominate the first black woman to the bench. Already a short list of possible contenders. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in the last 24 hours signaling a swift confirmation process ahead. They need just a simple majority. That threshold, of course, lowered by Republicans from 60 votes to 51. That was in 2017 when Republicans held the majority in the Senate. President Biden's nominee will not change the balance of the court. Of course, this nation witnessing a significant shift in recent years under former President Trump, a more conservative court now. Conservative justices will still hold a 6-3 edge. And as we await to see Justice Breyer and President Biden right there in the Roosevelt Room moments from now, I'm joined by our chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega. It's not lost on us. Justice Breyer long talked about this nonpartisan role of the court, but he's very aware of the timing here.
David, as you said, the timing is crucial, particularly for this White House. They have been preparing for this moment for a very long time. We are talking to sources inside the White House. They want to do this confirmation quickly because, as you were just saying, those midterms are not that far away. Democrats wanted the president to be able to secure a vacancy if one came up on this seat before these midterms in the event that they do lose control of the Senate. As many privately will tell you on Capitol Hill, they expect they very well may do. This is also about President Biden's legacy. He very much wants his legacy to be a part of it, at least to be a diversification of the federal government through the historic appointment of his vice president, of course, and now potentially to the Supreme Court bench. You mentioned this. This was a campaign promise that the president made during that crucial South Carolina primary when he said he wanted to appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court if a vacancy came up. This is something that is going to help him energize his party. It will certainly help him with black voters, but it will cement his legacy as diversifying the bench if he gets this through, David.
Cecilia, thank you. We watched the president here approach the podium. He'll introduce the retiring justice.
Good afternoon. I begin by recognizing both Dr. Breyer, Dr. Biden, and for being here. And I can't tell you, this is sort of a bittersweet day for me. Justice Breyer and I go back a long way, all the way back to the mid-'70s when he first came on the Judiciary Committee, but that's another story. I'm here today to express the nation's gratitude to Justice Stephen Breyer for his remarkable career of public service and his clear-eyed commitment to making our country's laws work for its people. And our gratitude extends to Justice Breyer's family for being partners in his decades of public service. In particular, I want to thank his wife, Dr. Joanne Breyer, who is here today and who has stood by him for nearly 6 decades, and with her fierce intellect, good humor, and enormous heart. I thank you. The country owes you as well. And Stephen Breyer's public service started early. He served in the United States Army as a teenager and in all 3 branches of the federal government before he turned 40. They were the good old days, weren't they? And as he was a law clerk at Supreme Court Justice Goldberg, a prosecutor in the Department of Justice, a member of the Watergate prosecution team. And I first met Stephen Breyer when I was a senator on the Judiciary Committee, and he started off as taking care of one of the subcommittees for Teddy, but then became chief counsel during his tenure as Ted's chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee. Beyond his intellect and hard work and legal insight, he was famous for biking across Washington virtually every day for a face-to-face meeting with a Republican chief counsel, the ranking Republican counsel. And over breakfast, they discussed what would they do for the country together. Whereas in those days, we tried to do things together. That spirit stuck with me when I took over the Judiciary Committee as chair after Senator Kennedy's tenure. And it was my honor to vote to confirm Justice Breyer to serve in the United States Supreme Court, or the Court of Appeals first, in 1980. And then 14 years later, in 1994, I got to preside as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee over his Supreme Court confirmation hearings. We were joking with one another when he walked in. Did we ever think that he would have served decades on the court and I'd be president of the United States when the day he came in and retired? And he looked at it, anyway, I won't tell you what he said. I'm joking. But I was proud and grateful to be there at the start of this distinguished career in the Supreme Court. And I'm very proud to be here today on his announcement of his retirement. You know, during his confirmation hearings way back in 1994, nominee Stephen Breyer said, quote, "The law must work for the people." He explained to us his faith that our complex legal system has a single purpose: tell people who make up our country. It was a different time, of course, but his brilliance, his values, his scholarship are why Judge Breyer became Justice Breyer by an overwhelming bipartisan vote at the time. Today, Justice Breyer announces his intention to step down from active service after 4 decades on the federal bench and 28 years on the United States Supreme Court. His legacy includes his work as a leading scholar and jurist in administrative law, bringing his brilliance to bear to make government run more efficiently and effectively. It includes his stature as a beacon of wisdom on our Constitution and what it means. And through it all, Justice Breyer has worked tirelessly to give faith to the notion that the law exists to help the people. Everyone knows that Stephen Breyer has been an exemplary justice. Fair to the parties before him, courteous to his colleagues, careful in his reasoning. He's written landmark opinions on topics ranging from reproductive rights to health care, to voting rights, to patent law, to laws protecting our environment, and the laws that protect our religious practices. His opinions are practical, sensible, and nuanced. It reflects his belief that the job of a judge is not to lay down a rule, but to get it right. Justice Breyer's law clerks and his colleagues, as many of the press here know, describe him and his work ethic, his desire to learn more, his kindness to those around him, and his optimism for the promise of our country. And he has patiently sought common ground and built consensus, seeking to bring the court together. I think he's a model public servant in a time of great division in this country. Justice Breyer has been everything his country could have asked of him. And when he appeared before the Judiciary Committee almost 3 decades ago, we all had high hopes for the mark he would leave on history, law, and the Constitution. And he's exceeded those hopes in every possible way. Today is his day, our day to commend his life of service and his life on the court. But let me say a few words about the critically important work of selecting his successor. Choosing someone to sit in the Supreme Court, I believe, is one of the most serious constitutional responsibility a president has. Our process is going to be rigorous. I will select a nominee worthy of Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence and decency. While I've been studying candidates' backgrounds and writings, I've made no decision except one. The person I will nominate will be someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity. And that person will be the first Black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court. It's long overdue, in my view. I made that commitment during the campaign for president, and I will keep that commitment. I will fully do what I said I'd do. I will fulfill my duty to select a justice, not only with the Senate's consent, but with his advice. You've heard me say in other nomination processes that the Constitution says seek the advice and consent, but the advice as well of the Senate. I'm going to invite senators from both parties to offer their ideas and points of view. I'll also consult with leading scholars and lawyers. And I'm fortunate to have advising me in this selection process Vice President Kamala Harris. She's an exceptional lawyer, former Attorney General of the state of California, a former member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I will listen carefully to all the advice I'm given, and I'll study the records and former cases carefully. I'll meet with the potential nominees, and it is my intention to announce my decision before the end of February. I have made no choice at this point. Once I select a nominee, I will ask the Senate to move promptly on my choice. In the end, I will nominate a historic candidate, someone who's worthy of Justice Breyer's legacy, and someone who, like Justice Breyer, will provide incredible service on the United States Supreme Court. Justice Breyer, on behalf of all the American people, I want to thank you and your family for your tremendous service to our nation. I'm going to yield the floor to you, Mr. Justice.
Thank you, Mr. President. That was terribly nice. And believe me, I hold it right here. It's wonderful. And I thought about what I might say to you, and I'd like to say something I enjoy is talking to high school students, grammar school students, college students, even law school students. And they'll come around and ask me, what is it you find particularly meaningful about your job? What sort of gives you a thrill? And that's not such a tough question for me to answer. It's the same thing. Day one, almost, up to day I don't know how many. But what I say to them is, look, I sit there on the bench, and after we hear lots of cases, and after a while, the impression, it takes a while, I have to admit, but the impression you get is, as you well know, this is a complicated country. There are more than 330 million people, and my mother used to say it's every race, it's every religion, and she would emphasize this, and it's every point of view possible. And it's a kind of miracle when you sit there and see all those people in front of you, people that are so different in what they think, and yet they've decided to help solve their major differences under law. And when the students get too cynical, I say, go look at what happens in countries that don't do that. And that's there. I can't take this around in my job. People have come to accept this Constitution, and they've come to accept the importance of a rule of law. And I want to make another point to them. I want to say, look, of course people don't agree, but we have a country that is based on human rights, democracy, and so forth. But I'll tell you what Lincoln thought, what Washington thought, and what people today still think. It's an experiment. It's an experiment. That's what they said. And Joanna paid each of our grandchildren a certain amount of money to memorize the Gettysburg Address. And the reason that what we want them to pick up there, and what I want those students to pick up, if I can remember the first two lines, is that 7 years ago, our fathers created upon this here a new country, a country that was dedicated to liberty and the proposition that all men are created equal. Conceived in liberty, those are his words, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He meant women too. And we are now engaged in a great civil war to determine whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. See, those are the words I want to see, an experiment. And that's what he thought. It's an experiment. And I found some letters that George Washington wrote where he said the same thing. It's an experiment. That experiment existed then because even the liberals in Europe, they're looking over here and they're saying it's a great idea in principle, but it'll never work. But we'll show them it does. That's what Washington thought. And that's what Lincoln thought. And that's what people still think today. And I say, I want you, and I'm talking to the students now. I say, I want you to pick just this up. It's an experiment that's still going on. And I'll tell you something. You know who will see whether that experiment works? It's you, my friend. It's you, Mr. High School student. It's you, Mr. College student. It's you, Mr. Law School students. It's us, but it's you. It's that next generation and the one after that. My grandchildren and their children. They'll determine whether the experiment still works. And of course, I am an optimist, and I'm pretty sure it will. Does it surprise you that that's the thought that comes into my mind today? I don't know, but thank you.
Doctor,
This is
I
from
don't
the
know that
Justice.
you've ever been to the White House in the Lincoln bedroom, but I invite both of you to come and stay. The Lincoln bedroom has, against the wall between the windows looking out, a handwritten copy of the Gettysburg Address written by Lincoln in that bedroom, allegedly, the sitting room. And so you got to come and see it. And even if you can't come and stay, bring your grandchildren so they can see it as well. Thank you all so very, very much for being here. And I'm not going to take any questions because I think it's inappropriate to take questions with the justice here. He's still sitting on the bench, and I'm going to give you your mask back. And but you'll have plenty of opportunities to get me later today and for the rest of the week, next week too. So thank you very much. Thank you.
President Biden in the Roosevelt Room there with Justice Breyer, and dare I say, refreshing words from the retiring justice in a country that has been so dominated by divisive politics in these times. He talked about our complicated country, but he also talked about what his mother told him as a child, that there was every race, every religion, and he said his mother would add every point of view possible. He said in his own words there, it's a kind of miracle, this country. And when he talks to students of all ages across this country, even the ones in law school, he mentioned, who become cynical, he said, he challenged them on that point and said this is all still an experiment, and he believes, as he said, that he's an optimist and that this experiment will work. And he says it's up to his children, his grandchildren, the next generation to determine if that's indeed the case. President Biden making news there by making it official, in his own words, that he will begin this process of trying to choose who comes next, who will fill Justice Breyer's seat on the court. He said that person will be worthy of that seat, of that legacy, a deep, extraordinary quality and experience that that person would bring to the court. And then, of course, he added this will be the first black woman he will name to the U.S. Supreme Court. This was a campaign promise he made. Cecilia mentioned it earlier. He made it during a primary debate just before the South Carolina primary, and he said here today that he will keep that promise in his choice for the court. Before we move on to the future and how quickly this could move, I want to bring in Terry Moran, who has covered the Supreme Court for years. And Terry, that was trademark Justice Breyer right there. He has long talked about the apolitical nature of the court, his respect for his fellow justices, regardless of their viewpoints. And he had words of optimism for a country that is truly challenged.
He sure did, David. And what you saw is what we got from Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court for all these years. A warm, voluble, optimistic personality, a welcoming and tolerant mind. And imagine being his colleague. Imagine, wrestling over very difficult issues with a personality and a rigorous mind like that. Sure, there were clashes, but he was a leader, as he was on the Supreme Court, behind the scenes more than in the cases almost, who sought consensus, who never really held grudges, who wrote in a milder way than some of the other more famous judges, who was always looking for compromise in the center to get it right, as the president said, for the American people. And in that way, just as Joe Biden in his way does, represents a bygone era, as Biden himself acknowledged, when leaders of our institutions across the country were that kind of person, looking for common ground, looking for what can be done and how it might be done. And we're in a very different era now. But what you just saw was just vintage Stephen Breyer, both on the bench and, more important, behind the scenes. That's really where his legacy lies. The court during his years went from a slightly dysfunctional court, a lot of people at each other's throats on the old court, to something that was very collegial over the years, and he was a big part of that.
Yeah, he was a consensus builder. That is his reputation, Terry. Thank you. I wanted to put up on the screen a sort of a before and after. So many years ago, served nearly 28 years on the Supreme Court. This was with then Senator Biden. And of course, in the Roosevelt Room just moments ago with President Biden all of these years later, and the president saying that he has patiently sought common ground, built consensus. The president saying today that he believes Justice Breyer is a model public servant in a time of great division in this country. He said the choice for the Supreme Court that he will make will uphold those values. And I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, because, Cecilia, we already know that because this promise had been made on the campaign trail, he says today publicly before the American people he will keep it, that there is a short list in place.
Yeah, there's a short list, David, and we should be clear, this isn't a list that the White House has made public as the Trump White House had done with their list of potential Supreme Court nominees, but this is the short list as we know it at this point. And let me just give you a quick run through of some of these names here. At the top of this list right now, it's Ketanji Brown Jackson. She is on the U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. She's a Harvard law grad. She clerked for Justice Breyer. Interestingly enough, she's also a former public defender. She's a mama, too. She was on former President Obama's shortlist in 2016 as well. There's Leandra Kruger, on the California Supreme Court. She clerked for John Paul Stevens. She went to Yale Law. She's one of the youngest people ever to be nominated to the California Supreme Court. She's also a mom of two. You also have there Leslie Abrams Gardner. She's on the U.S. District Court in Georgia. Interestingly, she is the sister of a well-known name, Stacey Abrams. And J. Michelle Childs, she's on the U.S. District Court in South Carolina. She's a mama, too. And she went to the University of South Carolina Law. And I point that out because, David, many of President Biden's supporters, including his good friend Jim Clyburn in Congress, have urged him to look beyond some of these traditional picks, these Ivy League schools, to kind of branch out. But make no mistake, David, President Biden is keenly aware, you heard him say this today, of the historic nature of this appointment that he will be nominated. He says he hasn't made a decision yet, but he is looking for extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, integrity, and that this will be a black woman making good on this campaign promise from there in South Carolina during the primary.
And as you've just pointed out, Cecilia, no shortage of experience, deep experience. And of course, this is just the short list that's been made public by reporters who've looked into the history of judges who could be on somewhat of a fast track given the president's promise. But as Cecilia noted there, this is not the official list in any way given by the White House. So there's always room for a little bit of surprise, though we do know the nomination, the pick will be historic nature. That is the one thing we do know about this. Let's bring in Rachel Scott. She's live up on the Hill at this hour. And Rachel, you always help to remind the audience how quickly this could move and what the stakes are as far as the numbers, what the president will need in terms of votes in order to get his pick through.
Yes, David, a simple majority vote. That is what Democrats will need, 51 votes in order to push through President Biden's Supreme Court nominee. Now, that threshold actually used to be 60 votes. It was lowered to 51 by Republicans back in 2017. It gives Democrats the upper hand. They have majority in the Senate, and they are running with it. In fact, I'm told Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee will be meeting later this afternoon to chart the pathway forward, and they are looking at a very quick timeline. On average, it takes about 2 months, 68 days for a Supreme Court nominee to be confirmed by the Senate. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed at a record 27 days, just days actually before the November 2020 election. And that is the timeline that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is eyeing for when President Biden names his pick. David?
Quick one more question for you there, Rachel, because this is always such an historic and fascinating process to watch it unfold. No one's ruling out the potential for at least some Republican votes for a nominee. They're not saying that will happen, but they're hoping for the possibility. The question I'm going to ask you is something I've asked you over the course of many weeks on other key votes, and that is whether or not the president can count on all of the Democrats to be on his side on this one. I gather that is the case, but no one can assume that given what we've seen in recent weeks with Senators Manchin and Sinema on other key issues. Of course, this is much more monumental, much more historic in nature. So can he count on all Democratic senators and, of course, the tie-breaking vote from the vice president?
Right, David, and that will be key to pass this on a party line vote to get this justice actually confirmed. And Democrats do actually have a pretty good record of supporting President Biden's judicial nominees here in the Senate. But you heard from the president today, he will be seeking the counsel of both Democrats and Republicans. And in fact, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin, has already reached out to Republicans on this. It's a sign that they want to get a bipartisan vote on this pick.
We will see what happens in the coming weeks. We heard the president there say he'll reveal his choice in February. Rachel Scott, Cecilia Vega, Terry Moran, our thanks to all three of you. Our coverage is going to continue on ABC News Live, abcnews.com, and of course, I'll be back with the entire team a little later today for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir. I hope to see you then. Until then, have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.